I'm Natalie Brooks, 31 years old, and tonight I walked back into the same dining room where my father once raised a glass and called me the one still figuring things out. I smiled, then pretending it didn't sting, but that moment etched itself in me like frost on glass. The same polished mahogany table gleamed under crystal light, the same sea air drifted in through the open French doors, and the same portraits of stern ancestors stared down from the walls. I arrived right on time wearing the same plain navy dress and driving the same dented sedan exactly as I had the year before. Nothing about me looked different, and that was the point. Because what they couldn't see, what none of them ever thought to ask, was that I no longer worked for anyone. I owned something they couldn't imagine. And before the night was over, they would hear the word they had never once used for me, CEO. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to earn respect in a room that refused to see your worth. I grew up in a house where success wasn't celebrated. It was measured, ranked, and paraded like a family heirloom. My father Charles built his law firm from the ground up and believed every achievement should shine through pedigree and position. My mother Margaret managed the household like a campaign, her smile polished to perfection, her words chosen for their social effect. My siblings fit that mold perfectly. Daniel was the family's firstborn golden boy, reciting debate speeches before he could drive bound for Harvard, then Georgetown, with every door already open. Emily followed as the poised diplomat, smooth-talking and camera-ready, destined for Washington. And then there was me, the quiet one who took apart the toaster just to see how the wires connected. When I was little, my father used to joke that I saw the world in circuits, not people. He wasn't wrong, but he said it like a flaw. I didn't crave a stage, I craved a blueprint. While Daniel was shaking hands with senators' sons and Emily was perfecting her smile for the school paper, I was in the garage, tinkering with delivery drones and timing their routes between neighbors' mailboxes. I wanted to understand how things moved, why some systems failed while others ran seamlessly. My parents didn't understand any of it. They called it a hobby and hoped I'd outgrow it the way other kids outgrew imaginary friends. By the time I chose Carnegie Mellon for college, the tension was already set. "That's a science school, isn't it?" my mother asked, her tone hovering between confusion and mild disapproval. My father sighed, muttering something about practical careers and family reputation. I went anyway. I studied systems engineering and applied analytics while working night shifts at a flower shop to pay rent. The owner, a kind widow named Mrs. Reed, used to save the bruised lilies for me and let me experiment with her outdated inventory software. I wrote a simple program that cut her waste costs in half. She told me I'd changed her business. My parents never even asked what I was studying. After graduation, I took a job at a logistics firm in Ohio. Nothing glamorous, just warehouses, cold mornings, and long hours spent tracing why deliveries kept missing their marks. I watched shipments of medical supplies get lost because weather data didn't update fast enough. I saw drivers stranded on back roads that GPS ignored. I filled notebooks with equations and patterns that might have prevented it all. That's when the idea began. What if an algorithm could predict every variable that caused delay before it happened? I didn't tell my family. They wouldn't have cared. They were too busy measuring Daniel's poll numbers and Emily's television appearances. The first time I realized just how invisible I'd become was at my MIT graduation ceremony. I'd gone back for a master's double major, top of my class, published a thesis on predictive modeling for logistics. As names were called and families waved from the balconies, my row stayed empty. Daniel was at a political summit overseas, Emily had a campaign fundraiser, and my parents were in Martha's Vineyard for a gala. My phone buzzed with a single text from my mother. "We're so proud, sweetheart." Attached was a picture of her gown. I kept my smile steady through the applause, but something inside me shifted that day. I stopped waiting for them to see me. The years that followed were quiet but relentless. I rented a storage unit, turned it into a workspace, and started coding. I named the prototype SwiftRoute, a machine learning system that could forecast last-mile delivery failures using live weather feeds and traffic data. At night, I tested it through a local food bank's volunteer network, mapping drop-off routes so donated meals reached seniors before dinner turned cold. It worked. Slowly, contracts came first. small distributors, then hospitals. I built a team mostly other engineers who knew what it felt like to be overlooked. One of them was Alicia Torres, my sharp-minded assistant, who would later become my COO. Together we scaled what began as a side project into a real company. And still, every holiday I showed up at the family estate exactly as they remembered me, the quiet one, the eccentric one, the girl still figuring things out. I wore the same navy cardigan, brought the mid-shelf wine, and parked my old Honda out front. Let them underestimate me. Their version of success was polished, public, and loud. Mine was built in silence, line by line, system by system. As I stepped into that dining room tonight, I could already hear Daniel's booming voice carrying through the hall, Emily's laughter blending with the clink of crystal. My father's tone commanded the room as naturally as breathing. I slipped into my seat at the far end of the table, partially hidden behind a vase of lilies. It was exactly where they'd placed me every year, a little out of sight, a little out of mind. I didn't come to fight. I came to listen to see if any of them would ask what I'd been working on all this time. I had a feeling they wouldn't. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't the same Natalie who once waited for permission to belong. I was there for a reason. And before that dinner ended, one word from my assistant's call would bring every conversation, every smirk, and every dismissal to a sudden stop. That call was coming soon, and none of them were ready for it. I sat at the far end of the long dining table, my view partly hidden by a vase of lilies. The family gathering looked the same as it did every year, Daniel holding court beside my father, Emily, basking in their attention, and my mother orchestrating the room with the quiet precision of a hostess who'd been rehearsing her whole life. The silverware glimmered beneath the chandelier, the conversation smooth and rehearsed, every laugh timed like clockwork. No one noticed I'd barely spoken. That was fine. I'd learned that silence was easier than explaining what I did for a living to people who had already decided it wasn't real. The main course arrived, sea bass flown in from somewhere my father would mention just loudly enough for everyone to hear. Emily was sharing a story about a congresswoman's campaign event. Daniel interrupted to talk about new polling numbers and policy language, and my mother nodded like she'd memorized both. It was a familiar rhythm, one I could predict beat for beat. I took a sip of wine and waited for the moment that always came next. My father cleared his throat. That sound was his way of calling the room to order. We wanted to take a few minutes tonight to discuss some updates to the family trust, he said, his tone casual but practiced. Daniel's posture straightened. Emily smiled expectant. I kept my gaze steady on my plate. My father began with his usual speech about legacy and prudence, how timing mattered in generational planning, how responsibility came with reward. He lifted his glass toward Daniel first. "The Nantucket property will be moved into your name at the start of the new year," he said proudly. My brother smiled, nodding as though the weight of history had just been handed to him. Then came Emily's turn. "Your education fund will now be converted into a long-term portfolio," my father continued. "You'll receive the full details from our advisor." My mother reached across to squeeze her daughter's hand. Toasts followed, polite applause echoing through the room. I set down my glass before they could reach the end of their script. I didn't need to guess what came next. Finally, my father looked toward me. His expression softened in the way people do when they're about to deliver a disappointment wrapped in kindness. "And Natalie," he said carefully, "we've decided to pause your allocation until there's more clarity around your professional path." It was the same tone he used when explaining market losses to nervous clients. "This isn't about punishment, darling," my mother added quickly. "We just think it's best for you to make some more traditional decisions, something more visible and secure." Daniel leaned forward, the practiced diplomat. "Your work is impressive, Nat, but it's hard for the advisors to evaluate startups. They're unpredictable." Emily sipped her wine and smiled faintly. "It's probably for the best," she said. "Startups fail all the time." I stared at the tablecloth. For a moment the sounds of the room seemed to fade. Cutlery, faint laughter, even the waves outside. I heard my father's words again like a quiet echo. "Pause your allocation." I had worked for years to build something from nothing but to them. It wasn't stability, it was a phase. I set down my fork and folded my hands. "Just so I understand," I said evenly, "you're cutting me off from the trust because I haven't followed the family template. My mother's smile trembled slightly. Not cutting off, sweetheart, just pausing. So no property, no investment access, no fund stake, I said, but not cutting off. The silence that followed was as deliberate as the words had been. My father looked down at his glass, turning it slowly in his hand. Daniel cleared his throat, but no one answered. I nodded once. Understood. I went back to my plate, though my appetite was gone. They expected me to argue, maybe cry, maybe apologize. I didn't do any of that. Instead, I lifted my wine and met my father's eyes just long enough for him to look away. Then in the middle of that silence, my phone began to buzz in my lap. Once, twice, then 3 short bursts. That pattern wasn't random. I glanced down. The screen read, Alicia Torres, work. She never called during family dinners. I excused myself quietly, ignoring my father's disapproving sigh as I stepped out into the hallway. Hey, Alicia, I whispered. Her voice came through bright and clear. Natalie SoftBank just confirmed. The 40 million wire hit. Valuations official 100 million pre-IPO. I stopped walking. Behind me, the voices from the dining room faded into stillness. Wait, Alicia continued, unaware of the audience she now had through the open doorway. Goldman wants the press release tonight, and Forbes locked your interview for Monday. Oh, and Tokyo's asking if you're ready to start expansion next quarter. Huge news, CEO. The last word hung in the air like a spark catching fire. I could feel the entire room behind me freeze. I took a slow breath. That's great news, I said evenly. Let's schedule a team call for the morning. Tell Goldman I'll send notes tonight. Got it, CEO, she replied before hanging up. I turned back toward the table. My family sat suspended, my father's glass halfway to his lips, my mother's fork midair, Daniel blinking Emily pale and silent. I walked back to my chair, pulled it out and sat down. The only sound was the soft hum of the chandelier. Then from the far end of the table, Aunt Clara laughed. It was a bright ringing sound that cracked the silence clean in two. She raised her champagne flute. Well, she said, smiling at me, I think that deserves a real toast. That broke the spell. My mother leaned forward, her tone suddenly warm and sugary. Darling, why didn't you tell us? My father's voice followed sharp with new interest. SoftBank, as in SoftBank. And Goldman's involved. Emily stammered, You're a CEO. I took another sip of wine before answering. I thought you said startups were risky. No one laughed. Then came the scramble. My father set his glass down, voice quick and coaxing. We should have known sooner, Natalie. If we'd understood your company was this successful, we could have arranged a family investment, coordinated strategy, helped you scale. Daniel jumped in eagerly. With Goldman on board, that's real leverage. We could frame this as a Brooks Innovation Initiative. A great story for the donors. Emily was next. My team's organizing a healthcare reform panel next month. Brian, my boss would love to feature you. Your work fits perfectly with our platform. They spoke over one another, each voice reaching toward the same thing they had denied me 10 minutes earlier. I let them finish. Then I set my glass down carefully. That won't be necessary, I said. My mother frowned. Sweetheart, we're just trying to help. I looked at her hand resting on the table, her ring glinting in the light. You were worried about me, I said quietly. But no one's asked how I'm doing in years. You weren't worried. You were embarrassed. Daniel shifted in his seat. Come on, Nat, that's not fair. We were teasing. No, I said. You were dismissing me because it made you comfortable. Their faces tightened. My father cleared his throat again, his usual attempt at control. You minimized everything I built. I continued, my voice calm. You told people I was between jobs, even when I was leading a logistics pilot across 10 states. Now that you see there's money involved, suddenly I'm part of the legacy again. So tell me what's changed. No one answered. Name my company, I said. Blank stares. It's called Swift Route, I told them. We use AI modeling to optimize last-mile medical deliveries. 27 states, 213 partners, 96% fulfillment. My father blinked. That's impressive. Yes, I said. It is. He straightened, slipping into his professional tone. Then we should revisit your position in the trust. Clearly the situation has evolved. I met his eyes. Nothing's evolved except your perception. He frowned. My mother started to speak again, but I didn't let her. I'm not looking for a family seat or a board title. Swiftroot is fully funded. Our investors believed before it was convenient. Emily exhaled sharply. So what now? We're just not part of your story. I looked around the table, the same portraits, the same polished silver, the same people who had never once seen me until money entered the room. You're not part of this story, I said, because you didn't want to be when it mattered. I stood. I have a team call in the morning. Real stakeholders, real believers. If you'll excuse me. My father pushed his chair back. Natalie, wait. We should talk this through. I glanced toward him. We already did, I said softly, over sea bass and betrayal. I walked toward the doorway, the room still frozen behind me. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Alicia Forbes' cover confirmed. Tokyo expansion greenlit. Congrats, CEO. I slipped the phone into my clutch and kept walking. Tomorrow they'd call, they'd write, they'd try to rewrite the story they'd ignored for years. But that night, as I stepped out into the cold air off the Maine coast, I knew something had ended for good, and something far greater had finally begun. The morning after that dinner, my phone wouldn't stop lighting up. Missed calls, unread messages, emails labeled urgent. Daniel's text came first, polished and impersonal. Let's chat soon. Lots of crossover potential. Emily's voicemail followed, soft, contrite, carefully worded. We should reset. You know I've always admired your drive. Then came my father's email, the subject line, plain and cold, discussion proposal. I didn't answer any of them. The house felt still as I poured my coffee and stared at the gray light over the harbor. For once, silence wasn't heavy. It was peace. Later that day, Alicia sent over the draft for our company's official press release. Swiftroot had reached its $100 million valuation, secured the Tokyo expansion, and confirmed the Forbes interview. But it was the last paragraph I read twice, the one I had written myself months earlier, waiting for the right moment to release it. It announced the Brooks Foundation, a $5 million initiative supporting young women in supply chain technology, especially those from underrepresented communities. The foundation would operate independently under Swiftroot's umbrella, focusing on mentorship, scholarships, and innovation programs. I'd chosen the name intentionally. The Brooks name had shut doors for me once. Now it would open them for others. The launch event took place 2 weeks later in our Boston headquarters, a renovated brick warehouse with high windows and the faint scent of fresh paint. We didn't invite politicians or corporate sponsors. Just the Swiftroot team, a few local educators, and a group of high school girls who had been selected for our first mentorship cohort. They arrived in borrowed blazers, clutching notebooks, their excitement filling every corner of the space. My engineers demonstrated how predictive modeling reduced delivery delays, how real-time data could move insulin shipments across the country without a single missed stop. The girls asked sharp questions and took notes like their futures depended on it. Maybe they did. When the presentations ended, Alicia handed me the microphone. My voice echoed softly off the brick walls as I thanked everyone and spoke about opportunity, not the kind inherited, but the kind built. I saw the girls' faces upturned toward me, each one a reminder of the version of myself that once thought she needed permission to matter. When the applause faded, I caught Alicia's eye across the room. She didn't need to say anything. We both knew this was what all those sleepless nights had been for. That evening, after everyone left, I found a new message on my phone. It was from my mother. We read about your foundation. That's extraordinary, Natalie. Would you consider letting the family host a fundraiser for it at the Vineyard House? I stared at the screen for a long time. It was the first time she had ever called my work extraordinary, and still the invitation stung. The same house where they had once voted to erase me from the trust was now offered as a stage for my success. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I made a quiet decision. The next afternoon, I stopped by a small flower shop on the edge of Cambridge, the same one where I'd worked during college. Mrs. Reed, the owner, still remembered me. Her hair was whiter now, her smile exactly the same. I heard about you on the radio, she said, handing me a bundle of white lilies. Didn't I tell you that mind of yours would change things? I thanked her, paid in cash, and slipped her an envelope with my company card inside. The next morning, a delivery van pulled up to the Brooks estate in Maine. A bouquet of lilies was left at the front door addressed to my mother. The note inside was brief. "Thank you for your offer. The foundation already has a venue, the warehouse where I built everything you once called a phase. Warmly, Natalie." Weeks passed and the foundation began its work. I spent most days buried in logistics meetings with schools, pilot programs, mentoring sessions, but one invitation stood out. A public high school in Baltimore asked if I would speak to their all-girls STEM academy. It was a modest place tucked between auto shops and boarded-up storefronts. When I arrived, the gym smelled faintly of chalk and floor polish. The folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, and about 50 students waited with open notebooks and curious eyes. I told them about SwiftRoute, how it started in a rented storage unit built on borrowed equipment and long nights. I described the early failures, the endless testing, and the moment when a simple routing algorithm helped a food bank deliver meals on time during a snowstorm. I didn't give them slogans, I gave them process. Real stories, real results. Near the end, a girl in the second row raised her hand. She couldn't have been more than 15, with neat braids and chipped blue nail polish. "My parents think logistics is for truck drivers," she said shyly. "They want me to be a doctor or a lawyer. Something serious. Did your family support you?" Her question landed with a quiet weight. I looked at her at the hope and fear in her eyes and answered honestly. "No," I said. "Not at first. Not when it mattered." She looked down, but I continued. "Sometimes the people closest to us can't see us not because we're invisible, but because they only recognize reflections of themselves. You don't have to fight them. You just have to build something they can't deny." The room was still. Then a slow ripple of applause began. The girl smiled, and I saw something shift in her expression, something I recognized. The moment belief begins. After the event, one of the teachers handed me a small gift, a white mug printed with the words, "Shipping Confidence since 2023. I laughed, thanked her, and promised to use it. On the flight back to Boston, I placed it carefully in my bag right beside my laptop. That night I stood in my loft, the harbor lights flickering below. Another wave of messages waited on my phone. Daniel's text was short. "We should collaborate soon." Emily's voicemail mentioned campaign partnerships and family unity. My mother's message was longer this time, an invitation to the annual holiday gathering wrapped in polite warmth. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened a manila envelope sitting on my counter. Inside were handwritten thank you notes from the Baltimore students. One card stood out in neat handwriting, "Thank you for proving that a girl like me can run the whole system." I set it beside another piece of paper, the old trust letter that said I was being excluded. 2 pages from the same story, but they carried very different meanings. One had erased me. The other proved I'd rewritten everything. A few weeks later, I hosted a quiet dinner for my team in the same warehouse where SwiftRoute began. The concrete floor was still cracked from those early days, but now the walls were lined with photographs of delivery trucks, code diagrams, and foundation events. We ate takeout at a long wooden table and toasted with paper cups. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. When the night ended, Alicia handed me a bouquet of pale peonies wrapped in brown paper. There was no card, just her knowing smile. I placed the flowers by the window next to a framed photo of the warehouse from years ago, empty, cold, and full of possibility. I stood there for a long time, looking at the city beyond the glass. Everything I built from that emptiness. And now, in the quiet hum of success, I finally understood what legacy was meant to be. Outside the harbor, lights flickered like scattered data points, small but steady, guiding the way forward. And somewhere in that reflection, I saw the start of something new taking shape, bigger than the company, bigger than the family name. Something that was finally completely mine. 2 months after the foundation launch, winter settled over Boston. The mornings came quiet and white, the kind that made the city sound softer than it really was. I had fallen into a rhythm: meetings, mentoring sessions, flights between partners, nights spent reviewing data until the office lights flickered off around me. The company was growing faster than even our most optimistic forecasts. Yet some days between the schedules and headlines, I felt a stillness I didn't know how to name. Success had filled the silence my family left behind, but it hadn't erased it. One Thursday evening, Alicia stopped by my office carrying a stack of reports and 2 cups of coffee. She leaned against the glass wall, smiling the way she did when she was about to bring up something I wouldn't like. "You've been invited to the New England Business Awards," she said, "Lifetime Achievement category." I laughed softly. "I'm 31. She shrugged. "Apparently that's a lifetime in startup years. The ceremony was scheduled at a waterfront hotel, the kind my family would have called respectable. I didn't plan to attend until Alicia added, "They're presenting the education partnership grant that your foundation funded. You might want to see it in person." The night of the ceremony, snow fell in slow spirals outside the glass atrium. I arrived in a simple black dress, no entourage, no speech prepared. Alicia met me at the entrance, whispering updates as we slipped inside. The room glittered with recognition: bank executives, founders, state officials. I recognized the look in their eyes when they realized I wasn't there as someone's guest. I had seen that look before, just in different rooms. When the awards began, I sat quietly near the back. They moved quickly through categories until the host paused and introduced the Education Partnership Award. A photo of our Boston mentorship team appeared on the large screen, engineers showing students the simulation boards, young women in safety goggles, smiling through their first data test. My foundation's name was printed at the bottom. The applause rose, and the announcer called my name. I walked to the stage as cameras flashed, shaking hands, nodding politely. Then I saw someone standing near the aisle just beyond the lights. My father. He looked almost the same: sharp suit, steady posture, the confidence of a man who had always known his place in every room. For a second, I thought I was imagining him, but when I stepped off the stage, he was waiting. "Natalie," he said, his tone practiced polite. "Impressive evening." I nodded, unsure what else to do. He gestured toward a table by the bar. 5 minutes. We sat apart from the crowd. He spoke first. "Your mother wanted to come," he began, "but she thought it might be better if I did." He folded his hands, searching for words that didn't sound rehearsed. "We saw the coverage, the interviews. The work you're doing, it's meaningful." I let him continue. "I may not have said it before, but I'm proud of you." For a long time I didn't answer. Pride was a currency he had never spent on me before, and now it sounded like an offering made too late. "Thank you," I said finally, because there was nothing else to say. He nodded once. "There's talk about expanding your foundation's reach into policy. Emily has contacts who could—" I stopped him gently. "Dad, I appreciate the thought, but we're doing fine. We have our own path." He hesitated, then exhaled. "I'm trying, Natalie. I know," I said. He looked older when he walked away, as though the weight of years had settled all at once. I watched him blend back into the crowd of polished strangers until the sound of applause swallowed him whole. After the ceremony, Alicia found me near the exit. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded, though the answer was more complicated. "Just old ghosts," I said quietly. That night I went home and sat by the window overlooking the harbor. The city lights trembled on the water, like reflections that couldn't decide if they belonged to the surface or the sky. I thought about my father's face, my mother's messages, the long silence between what they wanted me to be and who I had become. The next morning, a package arrived at the office. No return address, just my name, written in my father's careful handwriting. Inside was a small leather notebook. The first page read, "Notes from your grandfather's case files. He believed in patterns too." I flipped through the yellowed pages, filled with sketches of routes and maps, not unlike the early models I had drawn years ago. There was no note, no explanation, only those diagrams. I closed the book and felt something shift, not forgiveness, not closure, but recognition. That weekend, I took a drive north toward the Maine coast. The snow had melted into slush, and the sky stretched wide and pale above the frozen fields. I hadn't been back since that dinner. When I reached the estate, the iron gates stood open, the same ones that had once felt like a wall. The house was quiet except for the sound of waves beyond the trees. My mother answered the door. She looked surprised, then relieved. "Natalie," she said softly. "You came." I nodded. "Just for the afternoon." We walked through the hallway lined with portraits of ancestors whose names I barely remembered. The smell of cedar and polish filled the air, familiar and distant, all at once. In the kitchen, she poured tea and talked carefully the way people do when they don't know which words are safe. She told me Daniel was campaigning in Chicago. Emily had moved to D.C. for a new position. I listened, waiting for the pause that always came before something real. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Your father regrets how things were handled." "We both do." I met her eyes. "I don't need apologies," I said gently, "just honesty." Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her cup. "We didn't understand what you were building. We thought you'd disappear into something small." I was wrong. I nodded. "You were." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. "I hope you know we love you, even if we didn't show it right." I let her hand stay there. "I know." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bare branches against the windows. I finished my tea, stood, and looked around the room one last time. "I should go," I said. She followed me to the door. "Will we see you at Christmas?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Maybe." As I drove back toward Boston, the road stretched empty ahead. The sky turned pink over the water, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of expectation pressing on my shoulders. The past was still there, unhealed, imperfect, but it no longer defined the road ahead. By the time I reached the city, evening had fallen. The office lights glowed through the tall windows of our headquarters. Inside, my team was still working late, laughter echoing down the hall. Alicia waved from her desk as I passed. "Everything good?" she asked. "Better than it's been in a long time," I said. I stepped into my office, placed the old leather notebook beside the photo of the warehouse, and stood quietly watching the reflection of the harbor lights flicker across the glass. Somewhere between that past and this present, I realized something simple and true: building a legacy isn't about inheritance or approval. It's about creating something that lasts beyond both. And though I didn't know it yet, the next chapter of my story was about to test that belief in ways I couldn't imagine. A week after my visit to Maine, the winter storms returned. Boston streets turned into rivers of slush, and the city seemed to move slower, quieter. I spent most of my time at the office preparing for our new expansion phase. The Tokyo launch had gone public, and for the first time international investors were calling us, not the other way around. Every headline carried Swift Route's name, but what mattered most was seeing hospitals report 0 delivery delays during the storms. It was the kind of success that didn't need applause. It spoke through results. Late one Friday, Alicia came into my office carrying her laptop and a folder of updates. "The board wants you to consider relocating the Global Operations Center," she said, sitting across from me. "Tokyo's offer is solid, but Boston's still your anchor. We could expand without uprooting." I nodded, studying this map on her screen, dots marking routes, warehouses, and future hubs. "Keep Boston," I said finally. "This is where it started. I want the heart of it to stay here." She smiled, knowing exactly why. That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind. The office was silent, except for the soft hum of the heating system. I turned off the lights and stood by the window overlooking the harbor, the same view that had framed so many of my choices. The reflection showed 2 versions of me: the woman who once coded in a borrowed storage unit and the CEO of a global logistics company. I wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. Over the next few weeks, the Foundation's second mentorship cohort launched. We partnered with schools in 5 new states, expanding our reach beyond New England. The demand grew faster than we expected, and every email from students reminded me how much this work mattered. One morning, Alicia dropped a new proposal on my desk. "An invitation from the Department of Commerce," she said. "They're hosting a National Innovation Summit. They want you to speak about infrastructure and tech leadership." I hesitated. Government panels were Daniel's world, not mine. "You should go," Alicia insisted. "It's your space now." The summit took place in Washington, D.C., in a grand convention center filled with banners about sustainability and progress. I arrived quietly wearing a charcoal suit and no entourage. As I checked in, I noticed a familiar face across the lobby. Emily. She was talking to a group of aides, gesturing with the confidence of someone born to lead a room. When her eyes met mine, surprise flickered for just a second before she smiled and walked over. "Natalie," she said brightly. "What a coincidence." "Didn't realize you'd be here," I replied. She smoothed her blazer. I'm moderating the health tech session tomorrow. Small world, huh? Her tone was polite, even friendly, but I could feel the weight of everything unsaid between us. I read about your expansion, she added. Tokyo's impressive. Congratulations. Thank you, I said. And your campaign work? She glanced away. Busy. Always is. Then she paused. Listen, I know things were tense. Dad told me you visited. I nodded. We talked. She smiled softer this time. I'm glad. Maybe we all needed some space. The announcement chime saved us from going further. I'll see you inside, she said, turning back toward her team. The auditorium was packed. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage beneath the bright white lights. The panel focused on logistics technology and crisis response, exactly what SwiftRoute had been built for. As I spoke, describing how predictive data could keep supply chains running during disasters, the audience listened in silence. When I finished, the moderator thanked me, and the applause filled the room. From the corner of my eye, I saw Emily clapping too, her expression unreadable. Afterward, a crowd gathered near the stage, executives, students, journalists. Amid the congratulations, I heard a quiet voice behind me. You were incredible. I turned. It was Emily again, her posture softer than before. You spoke like someone who actually knows what she's talking about, she said. Not like the usual panel fluff. Coming from a communications director, that's high praise, I said, smiling slightly. She laughed. Maybe I deserved that. Then more serious, I'd like to talk. Not about business, about us. We met later that evening in a small cafe near DuPont Circle. The city outside was alive with traffic and rain. Emily wrapped her hands around her mug. You know, she said, I used to envy you. You never seemed to care what anyone thought. I've spent my whole life managing appearances. I looked at her. You were always the one who seemed to have it together. She shook her head. You missed the cost. I just hid it better. She hesitated. When Dad cut you off that night, I didn't agree with it. I just didn't know how to say anything. For a long time, we sat quietly. Then she said, maybe it's time we stop playing by their rules. You built something real, Natalie. Maybe I can help in my way communication outreach. Something that actually matters. I studied her face, searching for sincerity. I found it there. We'll see, I said. That evening, as I walked back to my hotel, the rain had stopped. Streetlights glowed in puddles, and the air smelled faintly of spring. For the first time in years, I felt the beginnings of something fragile but genuine, a bridge rebuilding itself one quiet plank at a time. A few days later, back in Boston, Alicia greeted me with a grin. Guess who just called, she said. Daniel Brooks. Wants to schedule a meeting. I sighed. What's he after? Apparently, he's on a task force exploring private-public logistics partnerships. He said your expertise could help shape the proposal. I leaned back in my chair. So now he wants my input. Alicia smiled. Looks like everyone does. I agreed to the meeting. Not for validation, but to see if my brother could meet me where I stood now, not above, not below, but level. The meeting took place at a Boston conference hall. Daniel arrived in a navy suit, confident as ever. Natalie, he said, extending his hand. Good to see you. You too, I said. He launched into his pitch about efficiency, innovation, bipartisan opportunity, the same political language he'd mastered years ago. When he finally paused, I asked, and what do you actually need from me? He hesitated. Credibility, he admitted. Your name carries more weight in the tech world than ours does right now. I nodded slowly. Honesty's a good start. He smiled almost sheepishly. You've changed. So have you, I said. We spoke for an hour. When we finished, I told him I'd think about it. As we stood to leave, he said, For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, Nat. The words surprised me, not because they were new, but because they finally sounded real. That night, I walked along the harbor near the office. The air was cold, the water dark and restless. I thought about Daniel's handshake, Emily's coffee, my father's notebook. Pieces of a family that had been broken for so long, slowly finding their way toward something resembling peace. When I returned to the office, Alicia was still there, surrounded by papers and open laptops. She looked up as I walked in. How did it go? Better than expected, I said. She grinned. Then we're on track. I nodded. Yes, but not just for the company. Outside snow began to fall again, light and steady. I watched it gather on the glass and thought about how every pattern, no matter how complex, could still find order if you looked long enough. The next morning, I opened an email from a small town in Montana. A public school wanted to join our mentorship network but couldn't afford the tech setup. Their letter ended with one line, "Even if you can't help, thank you for showing our girls what's possible." I read it twice. Then I called Alicia into my office. "Let's help them," I said. "All of them. No delays." She smiled, already typing. "On it, boss." As she left, I glanced out the window again. The storm had stopped and sunlight cut through the clouds in long, bright lines. Somewhere beyond those clouds, I could almost feel the road ahead, uncharted, but steady, like a route waiting to be mapped. And I had every intention of seeing exactly where it would lead. Spring arrived slowly that year. The snow melted off the harbor roofs, leaving the air clear and cold, full of possibility. The city moved faster again, freight lines humming, ferries crossing, early warehouse lights burning past midnight. Inside our headquarters, the rhythm of Swift Route quickened too. We were no longer just a startup. We were becoming something larger, steadier. Every week brought new partners, new challenges, new expectations. I'd begun waking before dawn, reaching the office while the streets were still empty. Those quiet hours became a kind of ritual, coffee in hand, reviewing data reports while the sun rose over the water. Some mornings Alicia joined me. She'd bring 2 bagels and sit across the desk without saying much, both of us scanning our screens in companionable silence. We'd grown into something beyond coworkers, a trust that came from weathering long nights and harder decisions together. In early April, she knocked on my door, holding a letter with an embossed federal seal. From the White House Logistics Council, she said, setting it down. "They're hosting a summit on emergency preparedness. They want you as the keynote speaker." I stared at it for a long moment. "They want Swift Route Y," I said finally. She smiled. "They want you." The event was scheduled for mid-May in Washington. For days I drafted and redrafted my speech, careful not to make it sound like a sales pitch. It wasn't about investors anymore, it was about what technology could do for people who never got to see the inside of a conference room. When the day came, I stood backstage in the bright, echoing auditorium, listening as the host listed my credentials. Then I walked out to the podium. The lights were blinding, the silence thick with expectation. I talked about systems that worked quietly in the background, how the most important operations are the ones no one notices until they fail. I spoke about hospital deliveries that arrived minutes before a storm shut down highways, about how every second saved could be a life extended. When I finished, the applause rose slowly, then grew stronger. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like arrival. After the event, officials and business leaders came forward to talk, but one handshake stopped me short. "Natalie Brooks," the man said. His voice was warm, slightly uncertain. "I'm James Peterson, Logistics Director for the Department of Defense." I remembered the name. He'd overseen emergency response operations during major disasters. "I've followed your work for a while," he continued. "We're building a national pilot program to improve supply routes during crises. I'd like you involved." That meeting marked the start of something new. Within weeks, Swift Route was collaborating with government agencies to test predictive models on military relief efforts. It was the kind of partnership that could reshape everything we'd built. Still, part of me stayed cautious. Partnerships with institutions that size were powerful and risky. I learned long ago that access often came with strings attached. One evening after a long day of meetings, Alicia caught up with me as we walked to the parking lot. "You've been quiet since D.C., she said. "You worried about this contract?" I nodded. "I just want to make sure we don't lose what made us different." She thought for a moment, then said, "You built this to deliver medicine to people who needed it most. That hasn't changed." Around that time, I received another message from Emily. She was in Boston for a conference and wanted to meet. We hadn't seen each other since D.C., and I agreed. We met at a small restaurant downtown. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from constant performance. "I heard about the defense project," she said. "That's huge." "It's early," I replied. She stirred her tea, avoiding my eyes. "Daniel's campaign isn't going well. The media's turning on him over a funding issue. He wanted to reach out but didn't know if you'd listen." I hesitated. I don't want to get dragged into politics. I know, she said. I just thought you should hear it from me. He's made mistakes, but he's not like Dad. He's trying. We ate in quiet for a while before she added softly, I'm proud of you, Nat. I don't think I ever said that out loud. It took me a second to answer. Thank you, I said. That means more than you think. When I got home that night, I found an envelope on my kitchen counter forwarded from my office. It was from my father. Inside was a simple letter. His handwriting was neat, but faint, like he'd written it in one sitting without pausing to correct himself. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you understand that fear and pride can look the same from the outside. I was afraid you'd fail, and I handled that fear badly. Your success doesn't surprise me. It humbles me. I read it twice before folding it back into the envelope. There was no address to reply to. He hadn't asked for one. The following week, I traveled again, this time to inspect one of our new rural facilities in Montana. The air there felt sharper, the kind that cleared your thoughts. The warehouse sat near a quiet town where the foundation had recently launched a student training program. As I walked through the floor with our site manager, a teenage girl in a reflective vest jogged up holding a clipboard. Ms. Brooks, she said breathlessly, I'm part of the mentorship team. We wanted to thank you in person. Her name was Leah. She showed me around the small operations center where she and her classmates were learning to manage routing software. I never thought I'd like this kind of work, she said shyly, but it makes sense to me. It feels important. Her words stayed with me all afternoon. When I left the warehouse, the mountains caught the evening light turning gold against the snow patches. Back in Boston, our projects moved faster than ever. The Foundation's mentorships doubled, the defense partnership expanded, and a documentary crew asked to feature our work. But with growth came new pressures. Investors wanted higher returns. Government partners wanted tighter deadlines. And the media started asking about my family history stories I had worked hard to keep private. One morning, Alicia burst into my office with a look I hadn't seen before. Natalie, she said quietly, you need to see this. She set her tablet on the desk. An article headline glared back, Brooks' Legacy Divide Family Rift, at the center of tech empire. It listed every detail, our dinner in Maine, the trust fund, even my father's letter. Somehow, someone had leaked the story. I sat back, the words blurring together. Who gave them this, I asked. No idea, she said, but they've already contacted your brother and sister for comments. I stood slowly. And they'll give them, I said. By the end of the day, I was right. Emily's statement was careful, supportive, but diplomatic. Daniel's was longer, painting our history as a private matter that reflects the growth of a close-knit family. My parents said nothing. The article spread fast, pulling old photos, speculating about motives, turning private pain into entertainment. That evening, I left the office and walked along the waterfront, the air sharp with salt. The wind stung my face, but I didn't turn back. I thought of every version of myself that had stood in the shadows of that family name, waiting, building, surviving. The story they wrote wasn't the truth, but maybe it didn't matter. I had already built something they could never erase. When I returned home, a message waited on my phone. It was from Daniel. We didn't leak it, he said simply. But maybe it's time people see that success doesn't always come from the same mold. I'm sorry it happened this way. I didn't reply that night. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the SwiftRoute homepage. Our slogan glowed at the top, delivering what matters most. Below it, photos of our mentors, engineers, and drivers filled the screen. That was the story that mattered. As the city lights flickered outside, I realized something else. The family name no longer defined the narrative. The work did. And though the world had finally discovered who I was, what they saw was no longer the daughter who'd been left out of a trust. It was the woman who built her own. The storm that followed that article would test every boundary I'd fought to build. But by then, I wasn't afraid of storms anymore. The week after the article broke, the phones never stopped ringing. Reporters called the office nonstop. Investors wanted statements, and every public relations firm in the city seemed to offer a solution. Alicia handled most of it, keeping the press at arm's length while I focused on work. But even within the walls of Swift Route, the tension was impossible to ignore. Employees whispered in hallways, unsure whether to congratulate me or apologize for the invasion of privacy. It wasn't just a story anymore, it was a spectacle. My childhood home, the Foundation's launch, even the photograph of me standing outside our old garage, all of it became headline fodder. Some articles celebrated my rise from neglect to success. Others questioned the family fracture behind a billion-dollar company. By the end of that week, I'd stopped reading any of it. On Friday evening, Alicia walked into my office holding her tablet close. "Natalie," she said quietly, "there's something you should know. They reached out to your parents for comment again. This time, your father responded." I felt a pulse of old dread in my chest. "What did he say?" She hesitated. "He didn't talk about money or the trust. He said, 'Sometimes you have to lose what you built to understand what was worth keeping.' That's all." For a moment I couldn't speak. The words didn't sound like a defense. They sounded like surrender. The next day I drove north without telling anyone. The roads were empty, the trees just starting to show green after months of gray. When I reached the Maine coast, the estate looked smaller than I remembered. My father was in the garden, kneeling beside the rose bushes my mother used to care for. He looked up when I stopped at the gate. "I figured you'd come," he said, standing slowly. His hair had gone almost white. "I didn't come for an apology," I said. "I know," he replied, "but I'll give one anyway." We walked the length of the yard together, saying nothing for a while. The ocean wind carried the scent of salt and lilacs, the same as when I was a child. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. "I read the article 3 times. I thought I'd feel angry. I didn't. I felt ashamed. I kept my gaze on the path ahead." "You were more worried about what people thought than what your daughter needed." He nodded. "Yes, and I thought protecting our image was the same as protecting our family. I see now it wasn't." We stopped near the edge of the property where the land sloped down toward the water. He looked out across the waves. "Your mother's inside," he said quietly. "She's been following everything. She wanted to reach out, but she wasn't sure if it would help or make things worse." "Tell her I'm okay," I said. He turned to face me. "You really built something, Natalie. Something good." I met his eyes. "I built it because you didn't believe I could." He flinched slightly but didn't argue. "Maybe that's true," he said. "Maybe that's what it took." Before I left, he handed me a small envelope. "It's nothing official," he said. "Just a few things that belonged to your grandfather. Thought you should have them." Inside were old photographs and a handwritten note about the family's first shipping contracts, long before the Brooks name meant anything. At the bottom, in faded ink, was one line, "Build what serves others, and it will serve you back." That night, I stayed at a small inn by the harbor. The sky turned lavender as the tide came in, and I realized how far I'd come, not in miles, but in understanding. Some victories are loud and public. Others happen quietly in the space where forgiveness starts to form. When I returned to Boston, the office was busier than ever. The story had unexpectedly turned in our favor. Donations to the foundation tripled universities' requested partnerships, and thousands of letters arrived from women who said my story reminded them to stop waiting for permission. Alicia dropped a thick stack of them on my desk. "You've started something bigger than a company," she said. One afternoon, as we prepared for a new grant announcement, the lobby receptionist called upstairs. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "Says her name's Leah." I smiled. "Leah, the student from Montana. I told them to send her up." She was taller now, more confident, her yellow vest replaced by a crisp blazer with the foundation's logo pinned to the lapel. "I got accepted to MIT," she said, beaming. "Full scholarship. I wanted you to be the first to know." I felt something tighten in my chest. Pride, joy, maybe both. "That's incredible, Leah. You earned it." She nodded. "The mentorship program changed everything. I didn't think someone like me could belong in a place like that. But I guess you proved we can." After she left, Alicia walked in holding her phone. "Daniel's calling," she said. "Should I tell him you're busy?" I shook my head. "Put him through." His voice came through steady but subdued. "Hey, Nat, I just wanted to say congratulations. I saw the foundation's numbers. You're doing amazing things." "Thanks," I said. "How's the campaign?" He exhaled. Over. I stepped down last week. I paused. That must have been hard. It was. But it felt right. I realized I was chasing Dad's version of success, not mine. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, Mom's been asking if you'd come for dinner sometime. Just family. No advisors, no press. I'll think about it, I said. Before hanging up, he added, I'm proud of you. Really. I sat there for a long time after the call, staring at the skyline through my office window. The city below looked different now. Not larger, not smaller, just more connected. Every street, every route, every name. The network I'd built was more than data and machines. It was a web of people, each carrying a piece of the same story. That evening, I went down to the warehouse where it all began. The space had been renovated, but the concrete floor still bore faint marks from the old desks we'd used. I walked the aisles alone, the hum of machinery echoing softly. Near the back wall, a photograph hung framed and new, the original Swift Route team smiling beside a whiteboard covered in scribbles. Underneath it was a single line I'd written years ago. Build systems that make people's lives easier. As I stood there, the lights flickered on, automatically flooding the space with a soft glow. Outside, the city moved on buses, delivery trucks, bicycles, each one following a path we'd helped map. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Emily. Mom says she still makes your favorite soup. Sunday, 6 p.m. No expectations. I typed a reply, then deleted it. I wasn't ready to decide yet. Some roads take longer to cross than others. When I stepped outside, the air was cool and clean. The harbor lights reflected across the water, shimmering like coded patterns, unpredictable, beautiful, alive. For the first time in years, I felt at peace with not knowing what came next. Behind me, the warehouse doors closed with a quiet click. Ahead, the city stretched wide and waiting, every street leading somewhere new. And though I didn't realize it then, the final turn in my story was already beginning to take shape. The invitation stayed on my phone for days before I finally decided to go. Sunday evening, just before sunset, I drove north toward Maine. The roads were nearly empty, and the sky glowed the color of late summer honey. I didn't know what to expect, only that this time I wasn't arriving as the family's disappointment. I was coming as myself. The house looked the same, white columns, trimmed hedges, a light still glowing in the front hall. When I stepped inside, the air carried the scent of rosemary and lemon, the same way it always had before family dinners. My mother appeared from the kitchen apron tied neatly around her waist. For a second, we both froze, unsure who should speak first. Then she smiled, a little uncertain, but genuine. "You came," she said softly. "I did," I answered. The dining room table was smaller than I remembered, set for 5. Daniel and Emily arrived a few minutes later, both quieter than I'd ever seen them. My father sat at the far end, the same seat he'd held at every dinner before. This time, he didn't lead with a toast or a speech. He simply nodded when I sat down. We ate mostly in silence, at first roast chicken, fresh bread, a bowl of soup that tasted exactly as I remembered. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "I read your latest report," he said. "The Foundation's expanding into rural hospitals next year." "That's remarkable." "Thank you," I said. Emily smiled across the table. "I met one of your students in D.C. She told me your mentorship program changed her life." She paused, her voice softening. "I think it's changing all of ours, too." My father set down his glass. "Your grandfather would have been proud," he said. He always believed the Brooks name should stand for something that mattered. I met his gaze. "It does now." He nodded slowly, a small unspoken agreement passing between us. There was no grand apology, no sudden reconciliation, but the air felt lighter than it ever had before. After dinner, I walked out to the garden while the others cleared the table. The ocean wind carried the sound of the waves, steady and familiar. My mother joined me a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of tea. We stood side by side, watching the light fade over the water. "I don't think I ever told you," she said quietly, "but when you were little, you used to line up your toy trucks in perfect order. You said you were making sure everyone got home." I smiled. "Some things never change." She reached out and touched my arm. "We didn't make it easy for you, Natalie. But you never stopped moving forward. I hope you know we're proud of you." I know I said, and this time I meant it. Later, as I drove back toward Boston, the moon rose over the highway pale and bright against the dark horizon. The city lights came into view like a constellation, each one a reminder of everything I'd built piece by piece, mile by mile. When I reached my apartment, I poured a cup of tea and stood by the window overlooking the harbor. The skyline shimmered against the water, and the quiet hum of the city below felt like its own heartbeat. I thought about the girl I'd been years ago, sitting alone at graduation, waiting for faces that never showed up. I thought about the storage unit where Swift Route began, the long nights, the silence that once felt like proof of being unseen. Now that same silence felt like peace. On my desk sat the old leather notebook my father had given me, the one filled with my grandfather's sketches. I opened it to the last page where the faded ink read, "Build what serves others, and it will serve you back." I traced the words with my fingertip, understanding them differently now. It wasn't just about business. It was about legacy, about giving meaning to what once felt broken. The next morning, I met Alicia at the warehouse. The mentorship team was preparing for another workshop, and the space buzzed with laughter and movement. Leah was there too, helping a new group of students learn route mapping. She waved when she saw me. "You said to build something that makes people's lives easier," she called out. "We're getting there." I smiled. "Yes, you are." As I walked through the aisles, the hum of machines blended with voices, footsteps, and the steady rhythm of progress. Every detail reminded me why I started, because somewhere out there someone always needs a system that shows up on time without fail. That evening after everyone left, I turned off the lights and stood alone in the quiet warehouse. The city outside was alive, trucks moving, streetlights flickering, people heading home. I thought about how every route, every delivery, every moment of this journey had led me here. Not to victory, but to balance. Family didn't have to mean perfection. Legacy didn't have to mean inheritance. Sometimes the greatest justice is living fully in the life you built yourself. If you've ever had to find your own way when no one believed you could, I hope my story reminds you that worth isn't something you're given. It's something you grow into, one step at a time. Thank you for listening. And if you've ever rebuilt your own version of home, share it in the comments. I'd love to know how far you've come.